Hello and welcome to this special America Media Roundtable. I'm Ashley McKinless, and today we are discussing President Donald Trump's recent tirade against Pope Leo. To analyze his remarks and Pope Leo's response, I'm joined by my colleagues, Father Sam Sawyer, Editor-in-Chief of America. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
And Colleen Dulle, host of America's Inside the Vatican podcast. Welcome, Colleen.
Thanks, Ashley.
So for context, on Sunday night, President Donald Trump issued an extraordinary attack on Pope Leo on his social media platform, Truth Social. And in a lengthy, incoherent diatribe posted just after 9 p.m., the president said, among other things, that Leo is weak on crime, terrible for foreign policy, wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and he also takes credit for Leo's election as the first American pope. He said if he wasn't in the White House, then Pope Leo would not be in the Vatican. He did have some nice things to say about Leo's brother, Louis, who he described as, quote, all MAGA, but he ended his post by calling on Leo to, quote, stop catering to the radical left and focus on being a great pope, not a politician. So a lot there.
Right, and there's certainly some important context out of the Vatican to situate this within. You know, Pope Leo has been quite a vocal opponent of the Iran war, and the president's criticism, in fact, came the day after Pope Leo held a prayer vigil for peace inside of St. Peter's Basilica, where he called for the end of war. And even though, following traditional Vatican protocol, he didn't mention Trump or the U.S. by name, he said that prayer acts as a bulwark against the delusion of omnipotence that surrounds us and is becoming increasingly unpredictable and aggressive.
There's also some more local context that may have been in play. So on Sunday night, just a few hours before President Trump posted his screed against Pope Leo, 60 Minutes broadcast an interview, really an unprecedented interview, with three American cardinals, Cardinal Cupich of Chicago, Cardinal Tobin of Newark, and Cardinal McElroy of Washington, D.C., in which they explained the church's moral teaching, their criticism of the Iran war as unjust, and also their criticism of the Trump administration's mass deportation policies on immigration. And then, no one said that this is what caused it, but just a couple hours after that happened, we had this post on Truth Social from President Trump.
And moving to Pope Leo's response, it was, as I think we would predict, more measured and cool-headed and conciliatory than what we got from President Trump. And he was asked about the president's comments directly by reporters when they were flying to Algeria, where the Pope is about to begin, or has already begun, his 10-day trip to 4 African countries.
Right. The Pope said a number of things to different reporters, and actually this surprised me because ordinarily in a situation like this, and as far as we can draw parallels with anything that has happened before, usually the line we would get from the Vatican or from the Pope is either, I haven't read it or I have nothing to say. But Leo responded quite directly. He even used Trump's name, which, as I mentioned before, is unusual. The Pope said he had no fear of the Trump administration and that he would continue to preach the gospel and to, quote, speak out loudly against war. And he also talked about how he doesn't see his role as political, as being a politician. He says, I don't want to get into a debate with President Trump. I don't think that the message of the gospel is meant to be abused in the way that some people are doing. And then he followed that up by saying, but there are too many innocent people being killed right now. Someone has to stand up.
So, Colleen, as you say, this is uncharted territory in terms of a pope having to respond to an attack like this. So while I don't think any of us could have predicted the form of the response, the content of what Leo said in response is exactly what I would have predicted for him.
Yes, he reiterated many times that his message is the same as the message of the gospel, which is blessed are the peacemakers.
Right. And we should remember, this is the Pope who showed up on the balcony saying, I bring you Jesus' message of peace, called for a disarmed peace and a disarming peace on day one, and he's been consistent throughout.
And he hasn't let this throw him from that message either. In his first speech when he landed in Algeria, he again spoke about peace. So he's beginning this trip to many countries that have already been touched by war in recent history, and he's continuing those appeals for peace. He's not straying from the message. He won't be distracted by Trump's attacks on him.
Yeah, I want to get to both of your reactions on what the president said and what Leo has responded. But first, looking at the wider condemnation that this has been met with in the U.S. Church. The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Paul Coakley, called it disheartening. And Bishop Robert Barron, who serves on the president's Religious Liberty Commission, said that while he was grateful for Trump's outreach to Catholics and his defense of religious liberty, the president owes the Pope an apology. I don't think Trump was responding exactly to that, but he did say on Monday when talking to reporters that he had nothing to apologize for.
And actually, I think some of this was related to the AI-generated image that the president posted, which many people viewed as him portraying himself as a Christ figure. But President Trump responded that he was portraying himself as a doctor. That post has now been taken down.
So what was your first reaction when you saw this post on Sunday night?
Well, I mean, if I'll be honest, my first reaction was, well, I know what I'm doing for the next 48 hours now. No, I was flabbergasted. Because somehow, even with as many norms and, as much protocol as Trump has dispensed with and run roughshod over, I certainly had nowhere on my bingo card, President Trump will post a wall of text yelling at the Pope. And then even if I had somehow been able to imagine that, starting it off by yelling at the Pope for being weak on crime, which doesn't even make any sense, right? I think that's probably about the Trump administration's line about mass deportations targeting criminals, which is basically a lie anyway. But it was just so absurd that really it floored me. But once I stepped back a little bit, I really thought about, this is where we are with there's a deep and very visible conflict between the values of the gospel that the Pope is representing and announcing and what the current U.S. government is doing.
What about you, Colleen?
My first reaction, actually, when I read just the week on crime part at the beginning was, is the president posting about the sexual abuse crisis? That was my thought of, what crime Pope Leo could possibly have any impact on. And in fact, no, it was maybe a veiled reference to immigration. And then there was all of this many, many other disjointed kind of thoughts throughout that.
Yeah, and this idea of him taking credit for the Pope's election, I wasn't quite sure what he was getting at with that. It's like he's so important that Catholics decided they had to elect an American Pope to contend with the U.S. president on the world stage.
Well, this is funny because I was just chatting with Christopher Lamb, who wrote a book about the American Pope called American Hope. And he was saying this was the line that Trump got right. He believes that, as Cardinal Francis George of Chicago said famously, there will never be an American Pope until the U.S. is in political decline. And in Chris's reading of the situation, the election of Donald Trump sent the U.S. into, if not a decline, at least such a loss of respect on the world stage that opened up the possibility of the cardinals considering that an American Pope could be possible, whereas in the past, the U.S. was just too much of a superpower to even consider doing it. I don't know if I agree with the analysis, but I thought it was an interesting take.
Yeah, I think there is definitely something there. But even if that analysis holds, it only makes his election as an American possible. It's not actually what drove it. I mean, what drove it is that he was trusted from his role heading the dicastery for bishops, that he was trusted because of his missionary experience in Peru, because of his global profile when he was head of the Augustinians. All those are the things that got Pope Leo elected. The idea that the cardinals in conclave were primarily focused on electing someone to stand up to Donald Trump is quite frankly farcical. And we were all there reporting on the conclave. We know that's not true.
Yeah, I find myself often agreeing with David Gibson's take that he published in the New York Times op-ed section where he said, Leo is not looking for a confrontation with Trump. In fact, Leo said the same thing on the plane this morning, but he's looking past Trump, right? He's trying to embody these values, Christian values, even American values of, caring for others and trying to be a moral leader. And that's just not what we're seeing these days from the U.S.
I think Trump may be responding to a narrative that certainly has developed within, certainly, since the summer when Pope Leo started speaking up more frequently about immigration issues in the U.S. and seeming to make, sort of semi-veiled references to Trump administration policy. There has been a media narrative depicting Leo as sort of like, an American with global standing in contrast to Trump. And so certainly that narrative is there now. And I think in some ways, the church is benefiting from it, or at least, the gospel is benefiting from it because we can see that contrast more clearly. But it's not what the cardinals were voting for, almost a year ago, last May.
Yeah. So, Sam, you wrote an article for America on Monday telling us Catholics not to take the bait, which I have to admit, as a Catholic, it's very hard not to take the bait when there is something this outrageous against, at least in my opinion, such a beloved figure, and much more than that for Catholics around the world. So how do I stop from just scrolling through Twitter and looking at all of the responses to this?
Well, and I should be honest here. There's at least an hour of drafting where I was taking the bait that has not seen the light of day. So it took me a while to work through it. But, actually when this clicked for me, I remembered a moment from our conclave coverage where another AI-generated image of Trump, if you remember this was 4 or 5 days before the cardinals actually started voting in secret in the conclave. Trump posted an image of himself as Pope in the white cassock with a mitre, and then the White House official account reposted it, and it was utterly ridiculous. And there was, a brief round of outrage about it. And we talked in our team that was in Rome and also with the team back here, back at home, about how much to cover this. And I remember saying at that time, what this actually means, if it means anything, is that Trump can't stand to not be the center of attention even for 5 minutes. And that's when it clicked for me that I think this attack, whatever immediate thing triggered it or instigated it, what it's really telling us is that Trump can't stand not to be the center of attention. And in that sense, he and Leo are they're not even operating on the same playing field, because Trump wants our attention to be on Trump and Leo wants our attention to be on the gospel.
Leo actually said just that on the plane. He said to put my words on the same plane as what Trump is trying to do here, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly. So when I say don't take the bait, that's what I mean. The thing we're actually called to focus on here is the call for peace, the gospel message of care for those who are vulnerable and suffering and in danger. And to the degree that we're just mad at Trump because he said terrible things about the Pope, then we're not actually answering the gospel call to peace. That doesn't justify the terrible things Trump said about the Pope, and certainly Trump should apologize, although I very much doubt that he will. But it's more important for us to, I think, refocus and redouble our efforts for peace than it is to win this news cycle about whether Trump or the Pope gets the better of this exchange.
I do think an instinctive reaction for me and maybe others is, looking to the Catholics in the administration and just expecting something. We have a vice president who is about to publish a book on his conversion to Catholicism, and J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio is raised Catholic. There are many others. And just, I don't know, it's hard not to feel like surely one of them will find the courage to stand up and say this is wrong.
I mean, I hope so. And certainly we should be praying for them, as we should be praying for all our civil leaders. But I also don't think we should get stuck waiting for them to do something. We should not let their courage or their lack of it be the measure of what contribution Catholicism has to make to the public debate and to the values of American democracy at this critical juncture.
Yeah, Colleen, I wonder what you think this incident, both what Trump said and how Leo responded, fits into the larger evolution of the relationship between the White House and the Vatican during Leo's papacy so far. It does seem like in recent weeks he's been stepping up his criticism of the administration and of the war in particular. How do you see that? Yeah,
reading all of Leo's statements over this last year that he has been Pope, I really see him coming into his own voice. I remember last summer when he gave that interview to Elise Allen for her biography of him, Pope Leo expressed some hesitance about being kind of thrown onto the global stage as a world leader. And he said, there's a big learning curve for me on this. And over time, I think we started to see it a little bit around like September and then again in January. Leo has become more and more outspoken, gotten more comfortable speaking off the cuff, for example, to reporters outside of Castel Gandolfo. He's kind of learned how to navigate some of those press appearances. So instead of waiting for questions, now he just comes up and says what he wants to say. But, and then we've also seen this in his more official speeches. So in January, there was the big one, I believe it was January 9th, when the Pope spoke to diplomats who are accredited to the Holy See from, I think, 184 nations in the world. And there he talked about kind of the collapse of the post-World War II, rules-based order that was in many ways pioneered by the United States, and lamented that it's falling apart, and spoke out against territorial violations, which some read as a response to the U.S.'s military buildup and then ouster of Maduro. And then to continue on into recent weeks, just on Palm Sunday, he kind of took things into the spiritual realm and said, Jesus doesn't listen to the prayers of those who make war, but rejects them. He talked about how you can't use God's name to justify wars. So we've seen him become more and more outspoken. And I think that him speaking to journalists so frankly on the plane this morning, when he easily could have said no comment, is really a sign that he's ready to continue down this road. And I think at the same time, he doesn't want there to be like a Pope versus Trump sideshow, right? Yeah. I think that he's going to do what he can to keep refocusing, using any attention that's given to him because of Trump, refocusing it on his message of peace and the necessity of caring for others.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your piece, Sam, that, Pope Leo never uses Donald Trump's name explicitly when he's making these comments, and that when he does talk about specific people, he points us to those who are suffering, the poor and the marginalized, and that's certainly what he's doing during this, or will be doing during this trip to Africa.
Yeah, and I think it's completely consistent with who he's been, but also I think with the message that he wants to send. Because, look, I think Leo would be happier than anyone if the U.S. posture towards the war in Iran changed, and if there were more openness to dialogue and a more trustworthy commitment to negotiation and seeking a peaceful settlement. He does not want to win the personal fight with Trump in the sense of being seen as better than Trump. He wants people to actually be converted to the cause of peace, to be converted to the gospel, and to seek out dialogue and peace because they believe in it. And in that sense, he's not trying just to, he's not trying to be the biggest and most impressive leader. He's trying to speak for a particular set of values that are deeply rooted, that come from the gospel and that reveal Jesus.
All right. You can read Sam's piece titled Trump is Trying to Distract Us from Pope Leo's Call for Peace. Don't Take the Bait at AmericanMagazine.org, along with our ongoing coverage of both the fallout from this incident and, more importantly, Pope Leo's trip in Africa. So check out American Magazine for all of that.